Great. Hello, everyone. My name is Jess McDonald, and I am the Media Communications and Programs Manager for Campus Pride. But today we have Sarah Beth Brooks here with us to present, and she is the founder of Asexual Awareness Week, and she's currently studying communication at Sacramento City College, but will be transferring to Cal State Fullerton to study public administration soon. In 2013, Sarah Beth Brooks was named one of Campus Pride's Voice in Action Top 10 Leaders in Action, and we're really excited to have her here to talk to you today, and now I'll turn it over to her to get started.
Thanks so much, Jess. I'm really excited to be here today. I'd like to start while I'm talking for a moment with everyone putting their campus location that they're from or their group that they're from in the box down here so I can get an idea of where everyone's at. As Jess said, my name is Sarah Beth Brooks, and I started doing this work in 2010 because I went to the Creating Change conference held by the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force in Dallas, Texas, and there was nothing about asexuality at all. And so I started doing this work in order to provide more resources and more opportunities for people to learn about asexuality. I'm so glad that Campus Pride has had us here to do this for everyone here and to have it be free and recorded so that we can use it across the internet for our continuing work is just so awesome. So I'm really grateful to Campus Pride. It's been a long time since I've done a webinar, so please forgive me if we stumble over the tech a little bit. We have until 1:15 in my time zone, which is about an hour and 10 minutes from now. So what we're going to do is have about 30 to 40 minutes of presentation with slides, and then we're going to have a question and answer period at the end. I encourage you to put questions into the box, though I may not look at the box until the end. I will certainly, because it can be distracting, I will certainly take a look at the questions at the end, and we'll get to those questions as well. This is being recorded, and this is something we intend to use in the future as part of our continued work. So if you don't want to be on voice recording, please put your question in the box so that we can make sure that it gets included in today's conversation. With that said, welcome. I'm really glad to have you here, and I'm really glad to welcome you as allies if you are allies, and as fellow ACEs if you're ACE. So let's start this off here. All right, so we're going to start with some basic definitions today. Let's start with what asexuality is not. There's a lot of myths and a lot of common misconceptions about the way that asexuality is, and so let's start with some of those misconceptions. The first is a big one, that asexuality is not celibacy. Celibacy is a choice to abstain from sex for whatever reason, whether it's a religious reason, whether it's a personal reason, whether it's something else. That's celibacy. But asexuality is an orientation or an internal attraction to the way that one experiences the world. For instance, somebody who identifies as homosexual is attracted to their same gender. However, that doesn't necessarily identify their behavior. It just identifies their attraction. This is an important distinction we make in the asexual community, and we're going to be coming back to it in a second. Another thing that is commonly misconfused with asexuality is androgyny. Androgyny is a gender expression that talks about, androgyny is a gender expression that expresses neither masculine nor feminine features. I know some people who are really, really, really good at dressing androgynously, and just beautiful, amazing people. That's not what asexuality is, though. However, asexuality is not an absence of genitalia. It's not an absence of gender expression. It's specifically a sexual orientation. Asexuality is also not a sexual dysfunction, a repression, or an aversion. This is a pretty common medical sort of prescribing of what asexuality is probably. It goes into the hormone imbalance and other medical issues too. So when people first hear about asexuality, a very common response is for them to feel like it should be a medical issue. It should be dealt with a doctor. For reasons that I'm sure you're all very familiar with, pathologizing somebody's orientation is pretty problematic. And so when people have these opinions of asexuality and express them, especially to newer asexuals who are coming out, it can be really hurtful. Questions like, have you had your hormones checked? Or did you know you could take a pill for that? Or, you could see a doctor. Even questions that talk about past sexual trauma all force asexuality to be a problem that has to be fixed. And it's really not. It's an orientation just like any of the other orientations that we have. It's also not a fear of intimacy. This is a pretty common misconception that asexual people can't form close relationships, that they can't form intimacy with one another. It comes from the fact that intimacy is rooted in intimacy is rooted in a conflation of intimacy and sex. That's the way it's been used in our society in the last 50 years or so. And because of that, when we have a conflation of intimacy and sex, then only sex can be intimate. And we forget about lots of other things that we can do that can be very intimate. It can be intimate to stay at home and drink a glass of wine and cuddle on the couch. And that doesn't include sex at all. And some asexual people enjoy that. It can be intimate to go rock climbing on the weekend and to sleep on the side of the rock cliff. And I know asexual people who do that and have a lot of really powerful emotional experiences from that. And so with those misconceptions out of our way here, we can move to some things that asexuality is. The first thing, and this is important, is that it's self-identified. When people come to the asexual community, a lot of times they ask, well, am I asexual? Can somebody tell me that I'm asexual, please? And this is a really important point for us to pause at in order to be able to, serve the population of people who, are identifying somewhere outside of the normative sexual orientations. That, we can't decide that someone else is asexual any more than we can decide that someone else is gay. It's a self-exploration process that has to be done by oneself. And so while I can give you a lot of resources and I can give you a lot of tools and tips, people need to identify with asexuality on their own. Prescribing somebody else's identity is also problematic. It's a sexual orientation. We talked about this in the myths section. A sexual orientation, is an internalized sort of feeling of the way that one experiences sexual attraction. It's different than a romantic orientation. And we're going to talk about romantic orientations in a minute. And asexuality is about attraction, not behavior. We talked about this a little bit on the myth slide, but I think it's important to note here that there's a bunch of asexuals who choose to have sex for a variety of reasons, whether it's curiosity, pleasing a partner, the enjoyment of the feeling of it, whether they want to try it out and aren't sure. Those sorts of things all lead asexual people to engage in sexual behavior. But that doesn't change their sexual orientation. If you all have seen the movie The Kids Are All Right, there's a great display of sort of the behavior orientation divide in this movie. When you watch it, it's a story, for those of you who haven't seen it, about two lesbians who raise kids together. And when the kids are older, they go looking for the sperm donor. And at the end of the movie, one of the two lesbian women sleeps with the sperm donor. And the movie never calls us to question whether or not that changes the orientation of the woman who's identified as a lesbian. The movie only calls us to question whether or not the relationship is going to be okay. Sort of the end of the movie leaves us nebulous about whether or not the relationship's going to survive. And that's exactly what we're talking about when we're talking about orientation versus behavior, attraction versus behavior. So who someone is sexually attracted to does not necessarily indicate what their sexual behavior is. And that's a very important distinction when we talk about asexuality. It's a big debate in the asexual community right now as well, and among asexuals everywhere. I want to make sure that we all have some some sort of base terminology. It's great to be able to talk about things using terminology that is going to be common among asexual people. So let's start with gray-A. I get a lot of questions about gray-A, and to own my experience for a moment, this is not my experience. I identify as a pan-romantic asexual, and we'll get to romantic orientations in a moment. But the gray-A experience isn't mine. So if there are gray-As here, I hope you'll speak up during question and answer time. And if you don't want to, there are also a couple of gray-A resources that I can give you in the chat box as we get to the end of today's webinar. So the gray-A community is best understood if we start to understand sexuality as a spectrum. Gender is a great analogy for this. So if we look at gender as a spectrum, as we understand it, male at one end and female at the other end, and all this gray space in between where you can be something in between, that's the same sort of spectrum that the asexual community spectrum is built on. So if you have the asexual at one end and the spectrum of the other end has sexual, then there's a gray area in between. The gray A's identify themselves as somewhere in that area between completely sexual and completely asexual. Maybe they only experience sexual attraction sometimes. Maybe they've only experienced it a couple times in their life, but don't anymore. There's a variety of different gray A experiences, but they are sort of that area in between. If we're using the gender analogy still, they are the gender queer folk within the asexual community. A lot of them identify with asexual people. In our statistics, which we took 2 years ago, we found that about 20% of the asexual community identifies as gray A or demisexual. Demisexual and gray A sometimes get conflated, but they're two different things. The demisexual community identifies sexual attraction based on emotional attraction. So they have to have a strong relationship built with someone before any sexual attraction could ever happen. This group feels a lot of camaraderie with the asexual community because they experience sexual attraction much differently than the rest of society. And they, like I said, with the gray A's, are about 20% of the asexual community. So it's a big subsection of our community. There are a lot of people who are younger who are identifying this way as well. And so they're important terms to know. Romantic orientations are pretty easy because we're all familiar with sexual orientations. We've got heterosexuality, homosexuality, bisexuality, pansexuality, which is being attracted to someone regardless of gender, and asexuality. Just the same, the romantic orientations identify who someone is romantically attracted to. In the asexual community, we delineate between romantic and sexual attraction, or physical attraction versus emotional attraction is a way that some people describe it. And so when we delineate it that way and we don't experience sexual attraction, we can still identify a romantic attraction that we might experience. And just the same way that there are sexual orientations, there is the heteroromantic folk, the homoromantic folk, the biromantic folk, the panromantic folk, and the aromantic folk. And everybody experiences their romantic attraction a little bit differently, and it's a self-defined and self-identified identity. But romantic orientations are a common language that we use to talk about our attractions. For instance, at the top of this slide, I said that I identify as panromantic. What that means to me is that I engage in feelings of romantic attraction for people regardless of their gender. It doesn't matter to me what body the person is in. I'm interested in who they are as a person. And so, and that's just the way that I experience it. So, and people will tell you lots and lots of different ways that they experience their romantic attraction and their romantic orientation. And each of those identities is unique and valid in the way that the person is experiencing it. Another really important term is queer platonic. The queer platonic term came out of the aromantic community, is my understanding. It came out of the aromantic community and is specifically used to describe a relationship that is that is a stronger emotional bond than friendship, Like if we were to have a relationship that, hang on a second, let me look at my notes here. I don't use the word queer platonic, and I want to make sure I use this properly. One type of non-romantic relationship where there's an intense emotional connection going beyond what is traditionally thought of as friendship. So these are relationships that have an intense emotional connection built around the things that they're doing together or the time that they're spending together. And those relationships, they're using this word queer platonic to describe those relationships. And then the last term that I want to make sure that everyone has and is familiar with is the term ace, which is sort of a catch-all term for people who are on the asexual spectrum. A lot of people are using it to sort of be a shorthand. Some people have problems with the terminology asexual because they don't feel like it covers the demisexual or gray-A community. They're using ace a lot. It's sort of becoming the trans asterisk of the asexual community. It's the way that we can talk about all of us in an inclusive way that doesn't leave anyone out. And so I use the term ace a lot to talk about asexuality, so I want to make sure that you've got it. So we're going to talk a little bit about some asexual youth issues, and then we're going to talk about the resources that we have available for everyone to be able to use to educate further about asexuality and to make sure that they have all the most current information. So these are listed as asexual youth issues, although they are experienced across a wide range of the asexual community. We have the best data about our youth because they're the ones who are online, and that's where we're taking our data right now is through online surveys. So we have the best data about the youth. These are different things that people hear as asexual teenagers and early 20-somethings from their peers. Female-identified students are often singled out for being prudes or selfish. This is in specific relation to being celibate, in addition to being asexual. Many asexuals are celibate and choose not to have sex for whatever reason. And because they choose not to have sex, they get labeled by their peers and those around them as prudes. This can lead to a lot of bullying and a lot of teasing that happens in high schools. I can speak from experience to this bullying and teasing, although when I was in high school, there certainly wasn't a word for asexuality, and that was a long time before I found the asexual community. But, you know, these are some of the different sort of ways that female-identified students are being bullied. The male-identified students are often being labeled as gay, although this also happens to the female-identified students in stories I've read. But male-identified students get labeled as gay because they don't always have the same sort of sexual experience as everyone else. And because of that, they just automatically get lumped in with other gay people. And that's problematic because it leads to bullying and homophobia against you know, people who are perceived to be gay because of their relationship status, because of their sexual orientation. There's also a bunch of terms that have been lobbied against asexual people. These are all ones that I pulled from Tumblr posts. Tumblr is a great place to get connected to the asexual community. Antisocial, weird, broken, sick. Broken specifically, I want to make sure we pause on, because broken is not just a term that's lobbied against asexual people. It's also an internal feeling that comes up as part of the coming out process. When asexual people come out, it's often because they've heard the term from somewhere else and then apply it to the experiences they're already having. For instance, I was engaged to be married, and we were having problems with our sex life. My partner and I were having problems with our sex life. And so I went into therapy because I felt like I was broken, because that's what society tells you when you're not engaging in sexual activity the way that everyone else is. And so the word broken is specifically problematic, although the others obviously are all problematic. But the word broken is one that is definitely internalized a lot. And so I wanted to make sure that we pointed that out. More issues, feeling empty, isolated, or alone. I can speak from personal experience on this, but there's a wealth of evidence that asexual people feel all of these things, especially before finding the asexual community. 5 years ago when I came out, there was nothing. There were zero organizations, resources, any of those things There's more now, but there's still a lot of people who haven't heard about asexuality, who haven't heard that it's a thing that exists with a community and lots of scientific research and data behind it. And because of that, they wind up feeling empty, isolated, alone. Very similar to the process of young gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender youth. Rejection by a partner or love interest for coming out. This is a really common fear as well as a common occurrence. I spoke with somebody a few weeks ago. I was giving a talk about asexuality on a college campus, and they came up to me afterward and told me about how they were being bullied by their partner to engage in sex, and they didn't want to come out to that person because they were afraid that they were going to experience some rejection there. And that happens all the time. That story happens all the time across our community. And that feeds into the peer pressure to have sex. This is not a new problem. Nobody's going to be shocked that this problem exists. But this conversation leads back to consent because and leads back to personal ownership of one's own body. When we teach youth to talk about their bodies in the way of, no, I consent, yes, I consent to this, no, I don't consent to that, it makes it a lot easier for asexual youth to draw the boundary and to draw the line. And so one of the great ways to be able to support asexual youth is to teach consent to them and to teach consent about what they are or are not interested in sexually very explicitly so that they can draw those boundaries for themselves. So let's talk a little recap here about serving asexual youth, and then we're going to move into the resources section in order to be able to arm you with some of the best resources that we have available to us. One of the best ways to serve asexual youth that we have so far is to change the way that you phrase things, use different language. For instance, when two people are hanging out together and somebody asks, "Are you just friends?" It becomes very problematic. Asexuals find this phrase to be problematic because it's diminishing of important relationships. So instead, there's room for, "I can see your relationship with Taylor is very important to you." It gives the person room to define the relationship for themselves without forcing a label onto it that might not exist. By choosing to change your language in certain ways, it will allow you to be able to be more ace-friendly and to be able to invite more ace people to talk to you about their experiences. Another thing that you can do with asexual youth is to encourage exploration. "You can't know yourself about that yet" is a pretty common phrase that asexual people hear, even in LGBT spaces. Instead, I encourage, and we encourage people to use, "Give yourself time and space to explore what you're feeling." This line worked really well when we used it with the Trevor Project. Last year, when we worked with the Trevor Project to make their materials more inclusive, we used this line, and it was very helpful for the people that they've been serving. Encouraging someone to spend time thinking about and exploring their sexuality also is going to give them room and space to define themselves for themselves, rather than being prescribed an identity by society based on what they think they might be or should be or have to be or supposed to be. And then the last one, we touched on this just a minute ago, is to teach consent. There's a very common response to asexuality of, "You might want to try it someday," or "Maybe you will someday." And while that sentiment is always rooted in really good sex positivity, and it can feel really natural to want to encourage someone to have sexual activity someday, to many asexuals, this is a really foreign thought. And so it's much better to reframe the discussion around personal choice and personal agency. That's something like, "Having sex is a personal choice, and you should always do what feels right for you." That allows the person to have space to be able to define what their sexual experience may or may not be within the context of their orientation. So we're going to move now to talk a little bit about resources and the ways in which you can get access to some more resources for your community. The 3 resources we're going to spend a lot of time talking about are the Asexual Visibility and Education Network, That's commonly known as AVEN and is an entry point for many people in the asexual community. We're going to talk about the resources we have at Asexual Awareness Week. We have the largest set of resources online that are downloadable, printable, completely free for everyone to have access to. And the Trevor Lifeline, which we talked about just briefly. The Trevor Project provides a 24-hour crisis hotline for LGBT youth and also includes a lot of information about asexuality. They were the first LGBT organization to become completely asexual inclusive last year, and so we have some information for you about their services. We're going to start by talking about AVEN. AVEN is primarily a message board community these days. They have some blogs and they do a zine as well, but for many, myself included, AVEN was a first entry point into the asexual community and the way that I sort of found out and discovered the community. When I was engaged to be married and in therapy, I was also up late one night trying to write my wedding ceremony because I didn't want to kiss my then-to-be husband at the end of it. I had no interest in that. And while I was up searching on Google frantically, I found the word asexual and I found the AVEN community. And that allowed me to enter into the community and have a better understanding of it. I stayed up on AVEN all night just absolutely crying because there were so many people saying all of the things that I had felt all along and all of the things that I had said all along. And there was a lot of joy for me in finding a community. So AVEN serves as that entry point a lot of times into the community. Message board has a pretty diverse set of people on it. There's a lot of age ranges. There's a lot of different communities that are represented there, and there's a lot of discussion about including more people on a pretty regular basis. So that's AVEN. Let me move my slide here. These are some of the resources that we have at Asexual Awareness Week, and I pulled them up as thumbnails so that you could see a variety of them on one slide. We have some of the largest set of resources on the internet. This is our resource center here, which you can find online. I'm going to give you the URL at the end as well, but it's asexualawarenessweek.com. And we have this set of resources here that include pamphlets and brochures. You can see here through the middle. We have some free books. The Asexuality, A Brief Introduction is a FAQ book. It's 130 pages that you can download for free, and it provides a huge overview. It's a great resource. I have some physical copies that I've been sending out to universities as well, but it's downloadable for free, so you should take advantage of that. Also, the Taking the Cake illustrated guide. This is a great, fun guide that you can print off and fold, and it goes in, your LGBT center or wherever else that you're putting out literature. That's a really fun one as well. And then there's a variety of pamphlets and things like that that are sized already to the 8.5 by 11 page. All you have to do is run them off. There's also some graphics if you decide to do asexual visibility events on your campus. We have a sample flyer. We also have some posters and graphics that we've collected from around the internet. In addition to that, we have videos, slideshows, and all sorts of other things that are up there. There's dozens of resources that are available on the website to be able to support you when you're working with asexual youth on your campus or when you're trying to build asexual resources for your community. So we already looked at the resource center here, but I encourage you to use it. It has, as you can see here, just at the very top of the screen capture, there's a variety of different sections, and we're always looking for new resources. So if you create a resource for your community, please let us know about it. We'll go ahead and put it up on the site. We'll give you full credit. That's not what this is about. We want to make sure that there's a clearinghouse for resources for the community, and that's what this page is serving as. So we invite you to use that, absolutely. Let's talk about the Trevor Project for a second. The Trevor Project is an amazing organization that does so much work for the LGBT community. It was started back in the late 90s or early 2000s after a film about a young boy who was gay who committed suicide. and the boy's name was Trevor. So the Trevor Project does a 24-hour crisis hotline. The number is there in the middle of this graphic, but I'll also put it in the chat box for you at the end. They do the 24-hour crisis line, but that's not the only thing that they do. They also have the Ask Trevor Project, which does a question and answer series, like Dear Abby. So you can write with your question or your comment or your concern, and they'll write you a letter back. Several of these have been done already about asexuality, and you'll have the links at the end of the seminar today to be able to look at those. But there have been several really good ones that have happened just in the last few months since we've been doing that training with Trevor Project. And then there's also Trevor Space, which if you don't know about yet, you should. Trevor Space is an LGBT inclusive social networking site, like a Facebook for LGBTQ youth. So it provides a safe space. They have a lot of really cool features inside of it, a place to be able to be out online and to have access to that sort of space and to be prevented from the sort of bullying that can happen a lot on Facebook. So Trevor has some amazing resources, and they're all asexual inclusive. So you can send any of your students to any of these resources, and the people on the other end are going to know about asexuality. They're going to know all the terminology that you now know, and they're going to be able to support the youth that that you're also working with. So this is, in my PowerPoint presentation on my computer, this was going to have all these graphics fly in, and it was going to be sort of a dramatic showing of all the different resources that we have. But since they're all on one page here, you can see this is just the tip of the iceberg of the resources that we have. Of course, we've got AVEN and Asexual Awareness Week and the Trevor Project, and also Campus Pride, who's doing this webinar for us this week. And the GSA networks in California have been doing asexuality workshops at their conferences for the last couple of years. Also, Campus Pride's conference on the West Coast had a workshop this year, which was really cool. The Asexual Agenda, which is a blog that talks about asexuality at a sort of meta level and where the community is going and how we think about a lot of different things. The National Union of Students in the UK is an organization that does all student advocacy and things like that in the United Kingdom and is fully asexual inclusive. We've had a dozen or more college campuses that have had resources sent out to them, or they've downloaded resources. These are just a few of them on here. The Minnesota Campus Pride Alliance, who are amazing, who do work in Minnesota to make sure that all the campuses there have access to resources and who are fully ACE inclusive now. The National Women's Association, Facebook, Twitter, we have a huge amount of resources that are available to us to be able to spread the information about asexuality around and to talk to more people about it, because that's what's going to prevent things like my story from happening, where I spent years in therapy before I found asexuality, and it wasn't my doctor, and it wasn't my therapist, and it wasn't any of my other gynecologists or the sex therapist they sent me to that told me about asexuality. It was Google. And so when I started doing this work in 2010, it was really, really important to me to be able to provide more resources to the community and to be able to broaden outside of the community and into the LGBT community, which is where I grew up. But they didn't know about asexuality either. And so I've made it my mission and my work to let people know about this, to do these kinds of events, and to provide these resources to people as much as we can so that you all can go out there and talk about it too.